What if everything you've been told about China is a lie? For decades, the Western media has painted a picture of China as a looming threat, a country bent on conquering the world, violating human rights at every turn, and governed by an evil, oppressive regime. But is any of that true? Or have these stories been carefully crafted to serve a narrative that benefits a few powerful interests? In this video, we're about to challenge the most widely spread lies about China, the lies that have been used to shape global perceptions and fuel fear. From accusations of military expansion to human rights abuses and the portrayal of its government as tyrannical, we're going to peel back the layers of Western propaganda and uncover the truth behind the headlines. What's the real China? The answer may surprise you. Get ready to explore a story that's rarely told, one that will challenge your assumptions and open your eyes to a country that's much more complex, powerful, and peaceful than you've been led to believe. Number 1. China is out to conquer the world. One of the most common accusations against China is that it is bent on global domination. According to this narrative, China's rapid economic growth and assertive foreign policy are signs that it intends to extend its influence around the globe, often at the expense of other countries. But this accusation is based more on fear and misunderstanding than on facts. First, let's look at China's military history. Contrary to the portrayal of China as an expansionist power, the country has not engaged in military conflict with another nation for decades. In fact, China has a long-standing policy of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. Unlike the United States, which has military bases in over 70 countries, China has only a handful of overseas military facilities, and these are primarily used for logistical support, such as the base in Djibouti for anti-piracy operations. The U.S., on the other hand, has hundreds of military bases worldwide, often involved in active conflicts, such as in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. It's interesting to note the double standard in how these actions are perceived. When China establishes a base in Djibouti, it's immediately framed as a sign of its growing imperial ambitions. But when the U.S. establishes a base in a foreign country, it is often justified as promoting democracy or security. The hypocrisy is evident when you compare the size and scope of the U.S. military's global presence to China's relatively small footprint. Furthermore, China does not export revolution or ideology in the way the West accuses it of doing. While the U.S. has used the concept of democracy as a pretext to justify regime change and military interventions in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya, China's foreign policy is focused on trade, economic partnerships, and mutual benefit. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, for example, is not about imposing Chinese values on other countries, but about fostering infrastructure development and economic growth, particularly in developing nations. This initiative is grounded in mutual respect and cooperation, not the export of a political ideology. Number 2, China has no freedom and human rights. The second lie often told about China is that it lacks freedom and human rights. The West frequently points to issues like the Xinjiang region and Hong Kong to paint China as an authoritarian state where freedoms are non-existent. But when we look deeper, we can see that the situation is much more complicated and not as one-sided as the West would have you believe. Take the Xinjiang issue, for example. The Western narrative claims that China is committing atrocities against the Uyghur Muslim population in Xinjiang, including mass detentions and forced labor. However, what's often omitted from this narrative is the context. The region has been the site of violent extremism and terrorist attacks carried out by Uyghur separatists. In response, the Chinese government has implemented counter-terrorism measures, which include re-education centers that aim to de-radicalize individuals and provide vocational training. The West has painted these efforts as human rights violations without taking into account the broader context of security and social stability in the region. Moreover, the notion that China is engaged in systemic human rights abuses in Xinjiang ignores the fact that China has lifted millions of people out of poverty, including those in Xinjiang. According to Chinese government reports, over 3 million Uyghurs have been trained in various vocational programs, and the region has seen a significant drop in poverty rates over the past few decades. This type of economic development is often overlooked by Western media, which prefers to focus on a select number of negative stories that fit the narrative of oppression. The Hong Kong issue is another example of Western double standards. When protests erupted in Hong Kong in 2019, Western media portrayed the protests as a fight for democracy and freedom, while China was accused of suppressing the movement. But the reality is more nuanced. The protests, which were initially sparked by a proposed extradition bill, evolved into a broader movement for independence, challenging China's sovereignty over the region. Hong Kong, a special administrative region of China, has always been governed under the one country, two systems framework, which grants it a high degree of autonomy. The West's criticism of China's actions in Hong Kong ignores the fact that the Chinese government was simply upholding its sovereignty in response to movements that sought to destabilize the region.
And number 3, China's government is evil. Another pervasive lie about China is that its government, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, is inherently evil. This narrative is rooted in the demonization of communism, which has been a staple of Western propaganda since the Cold War. The CCP, however, is not the same as the evil communism portrayed in Western media. It is important to recognize that the party has played a central role in China's rise from poverty to becoming the world's second-largest economy. The CCP's primary focus has been on economic growth, poverty alleviation, and national unity. In the past few decades, China has lifted more than 800 million people out of poverty, an achievement unparalleled in history. This is a direct result of the party's policies, which prioritize economic development, stability, and social harmony. The West often overlooks this achievement in favor of focusing on ideological differences. Furthermore, the demonization of the CCP ignores the fact that China's system of government is deeply rooted in the country's history. For thousands of years, China has been governed by a centralized system with strong state control over economic and political life. This model has worked for China, contributing to its rapid development and modernization. The West should not meddle in how China is governed simply because it does not fit the Western democratic mold. Just as Western countries have their own forms of governance that are shaped by their unique histories and cultures, China has developed its own system, which has proven to be effective for its people. It's also important to note that the CCP is not some monolithic authoritarian body. It is a political party that has evolved over time, and its leadership is accountable to the people, even if the mechanisms of accountability differ from Western democratic systems. While the West often highlights the lack of political freedoms in China, it rarely acknowledges the country's successes in providing for the basic needs of its citizens, including healthcare, education, and housing.
The lies that the West has spread about China are not only misleading, but also harmful. By framing China as an aggressive, authoritarian power with no regard for human rights or freedom, the West distorts the reality of China's position in the world. In truth, China is a peaceful country focused on economic growth and development, with a government that has lifted millions out of poverty and provided stability to its people. While there are certainly areas where China's policies can be debated, the Western portrayal of China as a villain is not only inaccurate but also dangerously simplistic. The next time you hear someone say that China is out to conquer the world, or that it has no freedoms, or that its government is evil, remember that these are the lies that have been spread for political purposes. The reality is far more complex and far less dramatic. China's rise is not the story of a nation bent on domination, but rather the story of a country that has worked tirelessly to improve the lives of its people and contribute to global peace and prosperity.